Everybody, and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for August the 6th, 2020. This is regarding a budget work session, information only, which means no decisions will be made. By way of introduction, I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board, and also present is Vice Chair Commissioner Ty Menser, Commissioner Gary Edwards, and County Manager Ramiro Chavez, and Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell. And Ramiro, will you introduce other guests that we have in staff?
Yeah, we have joined us Denise Doty and Patty Rosetto.
Okay. So as we begin, are you going to frame it, Ramiro, or are we going right to Robin?
Briefly, this is a follow-up to conversations the board had that you'd like to get additional information. So we have three major areas of discussion this morning. Is the annual versus biennial budgets. And then we'll get into the regular conversation that we'll have with you in terms of what will be your priorities that you'd like to incorporate on the 21-22 biennial budget. And also a conversation related to citizen engagement. And I believe those are the major three items you'd like to discuss that today. At this point, I will give the floor to Robin so she can kick us on.
All right, good morning, commissioners. I'm going to share my screen. And as Ramiro said, there are three parts to this conversation this morning. The first is about biennium budget, what that is, where we're at, and options that you may have, things to think about. The second will be to review your priorities of what you might like to see in the budget this fall. And the third part is citizen engagement and what opportunities you may have.
Robin?
Yes.
I just want to reiterate, these are three very important topics, but we're just getting a briefing on them. We're not kind of giving guidance or direction or deciding today.
We're not asking you to decide today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I will say, though, that time is of the essence when it comes to this budget. So if we're going to change course, then we would want a decision fairly soon, but not today.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'm trying to figure out why the slide deck won't advance. Here we go. Biennial budgeting. So as a background, the Washington state laws in 1995 permitted for counties to engage in biennial budgeting. It requires a midterm adjustment. There are options for supplemental and emergency budgets, just like there would be in an annual budget. There is an allowance that Thurston County did not adopt where you can do an annual budget for some of your funds and a biennial budget for other funds. At the time we adopted in 2017, or to start the biennium process in 2017, we thought some funds in and some out would just be more confusing and difficult in our system. So we went all in again in January of 2017. And there is the option for you to revert to an annual budget at the end of any biennium. So every 2 years, you have that option. Here's the budget development calendar. It's the one we're in the middle of right now. We developed internal service rates in the first half of the year. On June 18th, about 3 weeks before the legally required date, we did the call for budgets. That's where the auditor and the commissioner's office jointly let officials know that the budgets will be due on August 10th. That is about 4 days from now. On September 1st, staff will deliver to you the preliminary 1 budget. It is the agency request budget. Again, that is a statutorily required date. We'll engage in budget presentations October 5th through the 16th. We will ask you to have final deliberations and make decisions November 4th through 10th. We'll hold the public hearing on December 7th and 8th. And by December 22nd, you will adopt a budget. And I suppose you could push that out one more week if you want to, but really December 22nd is the as late in December as I would recommend. And again, we are here. Budgets will be completed by the offices and departments on Monday, this coming Monday. We are that close to them being done with their piece. We always allow for amendments. We've scheduled 2 a year. So in the coming cycle, there will be Amendment 1 in May of next year. We'll do the required midterm adjustment, shooting for an adoption date of October. Late October or early November is realistic. Amendment 2 would be next December. Amendment 3 early of 22, and Amendment 4 in December of 22. And you see the things that we ask offices and departments to focus on: technical adjustments, unanticipated receipts, corrections to the budget in the amendments. And in the midterm, that's a little more open, but we have asked in the past for offices and departments to show a little constraint, if you will. It's not completely open to any policy change, but we do address requested changes for the ensuing year. Biennial budgets in Washington State, according to MRSC, the state of Washington, of course, does a biennial budget, and they do 2 additional years. They don't actually enact appropriations for all 4 years, but they do budget for 2 years plus 2 more. So they are taking the long-term view. 8 counties in Washington State, 7+ hours, have biennial budgets, 55 cities, including Yelm, and many special purpose districts. So here are the benefits and challenges of a biennial budget. This list of benefits is not exhaustive. We use the ones that I saw most often in the literature, and I want to thank Denise for doing some research on this as well. So the first is that they are transparent. It provides our citizens with the direction that you intend to take them over the next 2 years. It's a better use of time, and we saved a significant amount of time in the midterm last year, and we're able to direct that time to focus on implementing strategies rather than just planning for them. You still have all the benefits of an annual budget because we're doing review and amendments. We are able to incorporate operating costs linked to capital plans when you take a long-term view. One of the benefits in the literature is that it instills the discipline to control spending over time. There are more orderly spending patterns, or they're more evident. You improve the achievement of strategic goals when you're thinking long term. It aligns funding to the time to complete a long-range complex project. And finally, and this is the one that is highlighted in all of the literature, it results in more sustainable finances because you are taking a longer view. So it was harder to find the challenges in biennial budgeting, but the number one thing that came up and that you are experiencing now is that there is some discomfort with long-term forecasting because of the uncertainty, and it's hard to predict into the future. people tend to be uncomfortable with forecasts. There is some loss of flexibility in a 2-year budget, but we have addressed that challenge by adding in the amendment in the midterm review process. If we were to go into an extensive mid-year process, that would eliminate all the time savings, and we might as well just be doing annual budgets. So that is a challenge to manage that mid-year process so it actually achieves some time savings. And another one of the challenges is that you cannot easily change the system. And I'm talking here about the IT system. In most of the literature, they talk about when you change to biennial budgeting, but it is also true about changing back to annual. Because one of the things that we know in our system at this very late date, it would be extremely difficult for us to change the system itself, and just updating our reports to annual reports, those legally required reports and the ones we use to brief you would cost about $50,000 if we could change them in a timely fashion. So that would be a rather big challenge for us. I wanted to share with you 2 quotes out of a new book from the GFOA called Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities. It's actually not all that new. It came out about a year ago. GFOA has done some pretty groundbreaking research, I think, and did pilots across the nation for 3 years. And they have released what they're calling the Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities. It's the 5 pillars that hold up sound financial practices. And 2 of the things that are pertinent to the conversation this morning are that if what they found is that if stakeholders only focus on the long or on the short term, that you quickly yield unsustainable outcomes because you're not looking ahead. And research has shown that a short-term perspective actually encourages people to pursue outcomes that benefit themselves at the expense of the larger group. And then the other thing that they're talking about is that taking the long-term view requires the acceptance of some degree of uncertainty. And here's that word that we've been throwing around a lot in the last 4 months, and that is that uncertainty word. It's interesting that this came out before the pandemic. This is not in reaction to the pandemic. This is something that is true whenever you do forecasting and you take a long-term view. There is uncertainty built into forecasts. So you have to take into consideration that the future might not look like the past. That is part of what affects it. And you're asking people to consider how today's decisions impact tomorrow and the future. It is uncomfortable to be in a state of uncertainty, as we all know right now, especially with the pandemic. But what GFOA recommends is that leadership is important to help people think long-term and to deal with the uncertainty that is just part of long-term thinking, that is a leadership trait to help people with this. You do
Robin?
look long-term. We have in the past few months only been looking at the next 2 years.
Commissioner Edwards has a question.
Yes?
Move on page 7, could you do the acronyms for the public, please?
The acronyms, GFOA is the
3 of them
Government
there.
Finance Officers Association.
Okay, and then there's two more.
There are two more acronyms. Which ones, Commissioner?
ICMA.
Oh, I'm sorry. The ICMA is the International County Managers Association, and the MRSC is the Municipal Research Services Council.
Thank you.
All right. So, as I was saying, you take a long-term view. And the last few months, we've only been looking at the next 2 years. But I now have forecasts from the state that I will use to incorporate into a longer term view. And when you look at the forecast, when we bring forward the preliminary budget, you'll be looking at a forecast that takes us through 2025. So even if you decide to go to an annual budget, you are looking at the long-term impact and making decisions about, what you do today takes into account what will happen to tomorrow. So that is something that the board does regularly, is take this long-term view. And that is not dependent on if you budget for 1 year or 2 years.
Hey, Robin, can you back
Yes.
to the graph for a second? I know that commissioners have seen this graph, and the black line is the $10 million ending fund balance target. But on the y-axis, information does not reflect that. I just want to make sure that the viewing public does not get a little confused on that.
The y-axis on the left is the amount of budget, not budget, but expenses and revenue, and the y-axis on the right is the fund balance.
Okay, just to clarify that, thank you.
Right, thank you. And we could move this little, whoops. If I wasn't in presentation mode, I could move this little box so you can see the fund balance numbers. But this graph is just an example to show you that you do look long-term, and there will be 3 more years when you go into budget deliberation coming up in September.
Hey, Robin,
Yes.
can I make a request? We, as we've been talking through the pandemic, we've been referring to that black line as the fund balance target. And I don't think that's accurate. That's the fund balance absolute minimum. And we voted as a board, majority of the board voted to set a much higher target for what our fund balance would look like. So I want to not confuse the public. I want to stop you referring to the black line as the target. That is not the target. And the board has voted that that's not the target for where our fund balance ought to be.
Right, that is the minimum to meet cash flow. All right, so instead of thinking either or, something you could do is consider how all of the interests, both long-term and short-term, can be met. So as I said, the budget is due from your offices and departments on Monday. And it would be extremely difficult for us to change the system to accommodate a switch to annual budget at this time. So rather than making the switch to an annual budget, I'm proposing that perhaps we think about what are the concerns of the elected officials who recommended an annual budget? What is it that they think that would solve? And is there a way to address that in the biennial budget process?
Is that a question for you're asking that question right now?
Right, I'm almost done, and then
Okay.
I'm gonna stop talking.
Okay.
So it's what are those concerns? I don't know. I have not heard them expressed. Hopefully you have heard from your fellow elected officials. But for example, if they're concerned that there will be decisions made in year 2 that are extreme reductions. Perhaps you do the main focus on year 1 and not do further reductions in year 2 until we know more about what the revenue looks like. Or build something into the instructions that says, if we see revenue coming in gangbusters and there really was not an issue, provide additional opportunities for increases or policy. Or maybe you set a contingency aside for unanticipated costs. I think that if we look beyond just the, let's turn to a short-term view and retain that long-term view, that perhaps we can address the concerns of the other elected officials within the context of a biennial budget. So with that, I am going to stop and turn this over to you for discussion.
Well, I'll begin with, I wrote down questions before we began this session. You've answered a few of them. The first was the advantages and disadvantages to each budget. And you addressed forecasting versus predictability and the adjustment that needs to be done. Now, the adjustment, is it minimal adjustments? If we went to an annual versus a biennial, are there more or increased adjustments or fewer in each one of those options?
So it all depends on how the board wants to define the midterm adjustments. You can make that as narrow or as open as the board desires. We tried to limit it to existing policy, no new policy. But we did address internal service rates. We're required to do that annually. We addressed any needs for inflation. We addressed COLAs. We addressed legislative changes. There was a pretty broad list of things that we did consider in the midterm. Again, we tried to not do new policy, and we tried to limit new FTEs. But it's all up to you on what you would like to allow.
Thank you. And it sounds like it would be an increase in staff hours for finance staff, for budget staff. And would that be the same for each office and elected office and department? Increased staff time in preparation on an annual versus biennial?
I would say yes in the non-biennial development. In the midterm year, we enjoyed tremendous savings in hours last year, and we would not have that next year if we went to an annual budget development.
And one more statement and a question. You answered my question already regarding the 50,000 cost to change the system, why that would cost. I understand that now. But you have in your time schedule, budget adoption on the 22nd of December. But the public hearing is scheduled for December 8th. Can that be moved up from the 22nd? Or you said you could be pushed back, beyond the 22nd, can be moved up?
Yes, you could make that earlier if the board so chose.
Okay, thank you. Now I will defer to my seatmates. I see Commissioner Edwards has questions. So go ahead, sir.
Robin, just to follow up immediately on that, you mentioned last year that you enjoyed more time or less time committed. And why was that? Last year we had, what was different about it? Because this year, obviously we've got the COVID and we did 4 amendments, budget amendments this year. I'm just trying to figure out the first year of a biennial budget, why was it that you had more time in putting that together?
So in a midterm year, when we had a narrow focus, a lot of those adjustments are automatic, and the offices and departments don't spend a lot of time in development. There are also significantly less presentations to the board. You're not discussing policy. We eliminated about 3 weeks of meetings with the board, so staff did not have to prepare for that. They didn't have to show up in the boardroom. It was a savings of your time. We were all able to focus on other things.
And the reason we had 4 budget amendments this year is probably the COVID. Is that what that's all about?
We'll only have 3 amendments, 3 actual amendments this year. And the extra one is because of the response to COVID, yes.
Otherwise, we would have only had 3, is that what I'm
We
hearing?
would have only had 2 this year, 2 amendments.
But because of COVID, we had 2 more?
No, it's the sequential counting. So from the biennial budget, in 2019, we've had a budget amendment number 1, number 2. Then moving into 2020, we have budget amendment number 3. And there would have been budget amendment number 4. If you add the COVID, response was amendment number 5.
I thought all the paperwork we received reference the vote last Tuesday was budget amendment 4. I
Yeah,
thought.
so that's what sequential. So start
Okay.
counting
Okay.
sequential from 2019.
Okay. Well, I don't want to hog the time here. Commissioner Mentzer probably has something to go to. I've got more questions though.
You can go
All right,
ahead.
go ahead, Commissioner Mensah.
Commissioner Edwards can keep
Go
going.
ahead, Ty.
On Amendment 4, that is still going to take place in December of 2020, right?
That will be number 5.
Yeah, okay. The 8 counties and other jurisdictions that are doing it, is that because it's relatively new, the law was passed recently, and the rest of them haven't caught up yet?
I don't know. We've not asked other jurisdictions why they don't.
Okay. Has this been discussed at the Association of Counties? I mean, have they had sessions of pro, con, that kind of thing?
Within the last 4 months, I would say no, but, not in our Association of Counties, but in long-term multi-year forecasting is considered a best practice in budgeting. I could provide you with numerous articles that advocate for that from the Government Finance Officers Association, from the International County Management Association, from many sources say multi-year is the way to go.
On page 7.
Hang on, Gary.
Oh,
To
Yeah.
that end, I just want to say, in 2 years on WASAC, or 4 years with WASAC, I have not heard any discussion or training or discussion on biennial versus annual budget.
yeah, I agree. I have not either. That's why I'm just trying to
Okay.
figure it all out here. The last bullet on page 7, under benefits, it results in a more sustainable finance. And how does that happen? I mean, what gives you a better picture of revenue, or what are you referring to there?
That's right. You're taking a long-term view. If you're only looking, if you look at this chart and imagine that the only year you're looking at, you're not looking beyond 2020, you might make decisions because it looks like you've got quite a bit of capacity. But when you look into the future and see, oh, it's not meeting cash flow needs, your decisions might be different because you're taking a long-term view, and one of the goals of the board is a sustainable financial future. So it's just like if you're driving down the road and you only are looking 5 feet in front of you, you might miss the truck that's coming straight at you that's a block away. Long-term view is a more sustainable future.
I guess, would it be, the way I'm looking at is, it'd be a lot easier with a static review, I'm sure, of let's not change anything, let's just go along with what we get. From my estimation, we ought to always be planning ahead, looking a long ways down the road. I don't know if we have to do that with biennial or annual. I'm not saying one way or the other, but we never did for years. We didn't change the way we did business. We didn't encourage business. We didn't look at regulatory reform. We didn't do anything to enhance our revenue stream that would have allowed us to make adjustments as needed to address future needs. That's kind of what my concern on all this is. I think we should be looking way down the road, way farther than 2 years. I've been an advocate forever of long-term and short-term planning. I just don't see why this restricts us or benefits us any way through there. I mean, these are all benefits that you've picked out, granted. Some challenges, okay, but I just, like the 50,000, I suppose that has to do with staff time, and I mean, it's nothing to do with licensing and stuff, is it? With
Actually, it would be paying our software vendor to rewrite our reports. And that's all that would be.
To rewrite our report, okay. I mean,
yeah, the reports that come out of the budget system.
Okay, well, listen and see what others have to say here for a minute.
Commissioner Menser, anything?
One question is I mean, there's no question from my perspective that in a kind of a normal world, the biennial budget makes sense. And so I guess I'm wondering if I'm just struggling with the kind of COVID uncertainty and whether or not there's an opportunity to do something better. And I know that there's some legislative underpinning to what the board did. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I wasn't here when it was decided, but if the board wanted to theoretically do 2 years of annual budgeting, but then revert back to, biennial budgeting as just a temporary deviation from our underpinning of biennial budgeting, is that, and this may not be even a Robin question, but is that require, what kind of legal maneuvering would that require to do legally? Do we have to change officially to an annual and then change back, or is there a way to make a temporary deviation while we maintain our underpinning of biennial budgeting?
So what you would need to do, because you can change, you would need to rescind the resolution that was adopted in 2016, and that would revert back to annual. Then if you wanted to resume biennial budget, you would need to adopt an entirely new resolution to do that.
So there's no way and I know any future board can do whatever they want, but there's no way for this board to make it known to the future board that we do not intend to abandon biennial budgeting. We only intended to get through COVID-19 for 2 years without a biennial budget.
So everything I've read about it says that you would just need to, very simply, you would have to rescind the biennial, and then when you were ready to resume, you would have to just adopt a new resolution. So we could certainly check with MRSC to see if there's, of course you could signal anything, but as you say, there's no binding a future legislative body to go back to biennial budgeting. But my question for you is, what is the goal that you would achieve by going to an annual budget?
Well, when we talk about one of the challenges of biennial budget is the degree of uncertainty of long-term forecasting. And that's true in a normal world. I think we've gone from, a degree of uncertainty to complete uncertainty. And to me, I think we've just crossed a line to where trying to set dollar amounts and priority, like, I mean, I don't know about the other electeds, but just from my seat, trying to make commitments to priorities in a world of complete financial uncertainty. I just don't think, I think it's an exercise that, and as you say, as you said, we will always take, and Commissioner Edwards said, and I agree with both of you, we will look long-term regardless. We will be looking, but to make everybody go through an exercise of setting dollar amounts and committing to priorities. And there's a whole bunch of projects and priorities that I would love to be trying to advance, and I just have no idea about how to go about that. And I had to answer your question about the electeds. I haven't gotten down too much into the weeds with any one of them about what their particular fear is. I think we would need to get a few of them into our meeting to describe it. But I definitely have heard that they have concern about that it's the right approach in this particular environment of uncertainty. So, I'm no expert on this, but it just seems like the things that are challenges on your list, number one being some discomfort with forecasting long-term. Well, yeah, that's in a normal biennial budget, there's discomfort. And now that factor just, I think, elevates through the roof. Secondly, some loss of flexibility. Again, that's a problem for me because I don't know where I don't know what our financial position is going to be month to month in terms of and that forecast is going to be so wildly, I think, fluctuating over the next 18 months that I think it's impossible for me to know whether I want to commit millions of dollars to X, millions of dollars to Y, adding sheriffs here, doing, supporting climate mitigation there, building a new jail here, building a new courthouse there. I just don't see how we can make any of those kinds of decisions on a 2-year basis in the current lack of information we have about our revenue forecast and our budget.
I have additional when you go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have anything more, Ty?
No, that's kind of where I'm at.
I was experiencing some technical difficulties in my office 50 feet away. So that's why I came into the boardroom. So I missed this, Robin, if you answered it already. One of my questions was, I've heard from a couple of electeds, they would love an annual budget, and I've heard from others that they would prefer the biennial. Do you have a sense of where the majority of the electeds land on that issue?
No, Commissioner, they've not expressed that to me.
Or budget directors?
So I think
good question, apparently.
it is a good question and it's worth thinking about. And I don't want to overstate or speak on anyone else's behalf. I think that the attraction of annual budget is perhaps that you would make different decisions in the short term than you would in a long-term view. And what I'm suggesting to you is you shouldn't do that. So I'm trying to get at the underlying, what would change really about what we do if you go to an annual budget rather than a 2-year budget.
Right, because we're still forecasting regardless.
Right.
And then finally, I wrote this down before you had said it, but I'm glad you said it, that whatever intent this board states, whatever decision we make and it's our intent, we are not binding any future board from any legislative action they may choose to take.
Right.
Okay.
Because I absolutely agree with Commissioner Menser. It's going to be a roller coaster for a little while, but I don't think that it's as unusual as you may think. And I would say that in my experience, you just do your best to look at the future. We rely on economists who know their business. This isn't the first economic downturn. We've been through many, and this one's really no different, except it was sudden. The only difference with this one is it was quite sudden.
Okay, and not just localized either.
Right.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
Well, I have to take exception with Robin's last comment. I do think it's much different than any other downturn we've had. This was, in the past, they've been financial missteps that have been taken that put us into the position that we found ourselves in. This one is strictly a medical issue that we were going from an excellent situation to probably as bad a situation as we could be. So, but regardless, I am concerned. It seems like none of us on the board today were here in 16 when this was adopted. So we're kind of all struggling with what we're up against, if you will, if you want to think about the uncertainty of this whole COVID thing. But I think we spend an awful lot of time getting talked at by staff about things that we probably don't know about, that we don't know near as much about as staff does, but we get very little time for real discussion as we go along during those presentations. And one of my concerns is on the page on 7 there with benefits and challenges, I think we need to discuss each one of those as you go through. Sure, those are somebody's opinion, but I kind of want to know why. I mean, almost every one of the bullets under benefit and challenges, I need to discuss why to make good, proper public policy. I need as much information as I can possibly get to make these type of decisions. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just making a statement that it takes a little longer to have discussions than sit through a class presentation, if you will. And I think we need to dedicate some time to doing just that as we have these type of briefings, if you will. So I think it helps us as board members make more informed decisions or better informed decisions. So that's kind of where I'm at on this. And are we scheduled to be done here at 10 o'clock? Is that it?
11.
11 o'clock.
Okay, so good. We've got a little more time for discussion. And I have to say, I would have liked to interrupt during this whole page 7 deal, but I wanted to hear the whole thing too. But then by the time you get through the whole thing, for us novices, if you will, I'm sure you folks in the professional field that you're working in, heck, you got a good understanding of this, that, or the other that you refer to, but I don't think we necessarily do. It's kind of like the acronyms. You know what all the acronyms are, but do we? Well, I don't see them listed anywhere. And does the public? Because we always like to keep the public informed about the actions that we're being considering or taking. And then I would really like to ask the elected officials in some format, what do they think? Now, whether, elected officials lunch and we can put that on as an agenda item to see what they think, but, or even yourself from a financial end, talking with each one of the members in those elected offices that we interact with. I mean, to hear you say, well, I don't know what they think about it, that makes me wonder what's going on with communication in the financial field that you're involved in. I don't know if you're just talking to those folks or if you're discussing things with those folks. But anyway, just kind of issues of concern, if you will. I'm not locked in one way or the other, but I do want to get it right when it comes to, we finally get to that point of making a decision. That's all.
All right, County Manager Romero?
Yeah, so I agree with some of the comments the board has made in terms of the uncertainty of time. And also I agree with Robin's perspective. But if moving into 2021, the board has many opportunities to address the uncertainty. The amendments, at this point, we have scheduled 2 amendments. The board can have another amendment depending on the change in circumstances. And also, as Robin stated, the board can widen the scope of the midterm budget amendment at the end of 2020 to address any new information or any uncertainty perhaps the board has. And so really is opportunities to react as you have this year to the impact of COVID-19. The board will have opportunities to adjust based on new information in 2021. The amendments the staff is planning to have before you, or you can incorporate and ask staff to create another amendment as we have, for instance, this year, an additional amendment number 4. So, and that's probably, I agree that a biennial budget gives us a larger picture, but not necessarily you're committed to year 2 because you are in the position to adjust as you see fit based on the changing circumstances. But I think it's worth going through a biennial budget. It puts all the offices and departments to look at the long term, the longer term. So this is a good financial practice. It has been put in place. And so I just want to provide my 2 cents on the whole perspective. I agree with the uncertainty. I agree with the changing conditions. But the board has opportunities to adjust and address those changing conditions in 2021.
Thank you, Robin. I'd like to ask, you and your staff are always available to any commissioner should we have questions or discussions over certain topics with you?
Always.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Minster, anything further on this before we get into priorities?
Well, I just want to say that, I mean, I get what Ramiro's saying, but those once you set the structure of the budget, the adjustments are going to be basically about, unexpected return in revenue, and you're going to, obviously you're going to have the ability to do, to do some things to adjust to realities, but those adjustments are not going to be, it's not going to be appropriate to do any structural changes at that point, in my opinion, because people have committed, and the board's committed. I didn't ask for a lot of structural changes in the last year and a half's worth of budget because I felt that the previous board had set the structure of the budget and its main priorities, and I had to respect that because that's what our offices and departments have relied upon, and they'd worked with the previous board to develop, and that was not my purview. But now we're sitting here trying to set priorities for potentially the next 2 years, and I feel that that's really difficult to do, not with the tremendous uncertainty of the revenue available. So, and I don't think I'm going to have the latitude to make the kind of changes or adjustments I might like to see on any kind of midterm or a budget amendment, which we put side rails on, and it's going to be just making, kind of like we did this year, across the board cut because we don't have quite as much money, or maybe we have more money, we do bump things up across the, I just don't see that we're going to be able to make structural changes or shifting of priorities. And my priorities I'm telling you, my priorities will shift dramatically depending on the available revenue. And I feel that that's going to be a very difficult exercise for me. And I assume that's where the electeds are as well, but I don't want to speak for them. And I agree with Commissioner Edwards. I would like to have direct input. I'm a little troubled by the fact that our budget staff doesn't really know what the electeds want. I would have assumed there would have been that link of communication. Given that there's not, I think we should send an email to the electeds and say the board is considering an annual budget. If anyone wants to come and make a pitch as to why that's the right approach, we're giving you that opportunity. If nobody wants to come and talk to us about it, okay, then we'll rely on our budget staff information. But I'd like to see that conversation happen so that we can get right to the nitty gritty of what the concerns are. Because I've never been through this process. our elected officials, I think, across the board have, some of them multiple times.
That's why I asked the question, because I'm hearing from both ends of the spectrum what they prefer, so it'd be nice to hear what they all think. As for setting priorities, yeah, they're gonna shift and change. In my home, we set priorities, and they shift and change all the time on the whole spectrum of facets that influence the availability to achieve our goals, but we're constantly shifting and changing. Go ahead, Robin.
So what I was going to say is those are all very valid concerns, and we can find ways to address them. And as far as putting sideboards, those sideboards are up to the board. It can be as flexible, the midterm adjustments or the amendments can be as flexible as you want them to be, which is why I'm posing this question here. If the concern is a lack of flexibility, you can provide more with the expectation that that will come, whether you do an annual or a biennial budget. I will also just remind you all that the offices and departments are almost done. They're 4 days away from their part being done. And at this point in time, it would be very difficult for us to change the system.
Okay, we have just over an hour, so let's get on with the priorities, the board's priorities for next year and 22, and then we'll talk about citizen engagement. The citizen engagement may take longer than priority setting, I don't know. But let's begin that if we can.
Okay, so
Go ahead, Romero.
So I'd really like to probably hear from the board with next steps. What do you like to see next steps? I'm hearing from the board members a lot of questions and in a perception there is not enough communication with the budget staff. So is there anything that you'd like to have or you like to expect as a result between the annual and biennial budgets? Just want to make sure that we don't move away from this item without capturing what the board members would like to do or have or see as a next steps.
Is that a question to the board?
Yeah, I was wondering, is that for the board?
Yeah.
I have some
Go
concerns.
ahead, Gary.
I guess, then going back to that, I would like to see, I am really concerned that there's not been much communication with other folks in this budget arena as to what the other electeds would like. That, I have to say, does bother me a little bit. I do think that as we move forward, I realize everybody's doing a biennial budget that they're preparing for, but what would it matter other than some verbiage on a resolution or something that just said, hey, we're doing this on a one-year basis until we get through this damn thing, and all of you better be planning ahead, anyway. I can't imagine any elected office that wasn't planning ahead. I've held these elected offices, or one of them in the past, and I spent all my time planning ahead. I have to say, I didn't always get that cooperation from the Board of County Commissioners, but that's neither here nor there. That's just the way it works. So I am a little concerned that we need to hear more information from all the players that we interact with. Yes, we could go around talking to each one of them, but let's get it on an agenda somewhere, find out. I would hope in some of your regular interactions, the financial folks, that you would be coming up with a sense and reporting back to the board about what that sense is, and any suggestions that group, I mean, you're interacting with those folks all the time, so I'd like to hear more back about that.
So you would like for me to ask the county financial leadership what their views are on annual versus biennial? Because I can certainly do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a piece of it. It bothers me that you haven't even talked about it yet. Commissioner Menser and I have both been bringing this issue up for several months now, wondering, you know, I mean, I would think that would be talked about at some point, but I guess maybe my
So
expectations are, I know everybody's busy too, so I hate to sound critical, but I do think those are issues that ought to be talked about. And then if we heard back as a board, holy mackerel, you guys are gonna sink the ship if you try changing that now, well, we're gonna reflect that, I would hope. So I need a little more input, that's all.
and that's great. And I have not heard from any of the finance staff in the county that that they are having any particular difficulties with a biennial budget. And the elected officials have not reached out to me, they are reaching out to you.
Okay, well, please ask the question, I guess.
Yeah, please.
I will be happy to
Yeah.
have that conversation.
And then maybe we can get them to participate in an elected officials meeting that we try to have. I think we're still doing those monthly, is that
Yep,
right?
we are.
Sure.
And we can put that on the agenda. Maybe that'll encourage attendance somehow.
Okay.
So one option that I will throw out that is just now occurring to me as we sit here having this conversation is that you could adopt a biennial budget where the second year, what you could put in your resolution is the second year is advisory and open to change. And just to make it extremely clear that you would consider, and we could work on what the resolution would say, but just to be very clear that you will be open to any changes based on revenue. And so that the first year is set, but the second year is more like Jello, if you will. We can do things if to try to get to the underlying concerns of what a biennial budget means to people.
I like that from the standpoint that it gives us great flexibility. It also builds in the intent of the board at the time that we're going through this, because this is going to be historic a year and a half, 2 years down the road, or forever. And so it states our intent, gives us great flexibility, our future board's flexibility. And I agree with Commissioner Edwards that we are in the worst economic condition that we can imagine. But we differ on, he doesn't think the sky's falling. I think we did take appropriate action to prevent that from happening. So I like that idea, Robin. Thank you for putting that forward.
Okay.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Edwards, but I want to put a more of a finer point on it, which is that if we're going to have that conversation and that elected officials meeting, I want it to be as soon as possible, because if we hear, I'm not decided on this, and if we hear that that single year budgeting makes more sense, then I want to hear that in enough time to actually implement it. And as you say, time is passing quickly, and the opportunity to change course may be very limited. So I agree with Commissioner Edwards, and I want to add to it that I'd like these conversations between financial leaders and then between the board and electeds happen as soon as possible.
Right.
So the next
Because in
elected,
3.5 weeks, we will be delivering to you a biennial preliminary budget.
Go ahead, Romero.
the next elected,
I will reiterate, I will support what Commissioner Edwards said, though, is that we've been bringing this up for at least 6 weeks. And so I don't necessarily want to hear that it's too late, because we definitely brought the issue that we wanted to discuss it in a time before it was too late.
the next elected officials meeting that you have is scheduled for Wednesday, August 19th. Would you like to move that, see if I can move that a little bit closer?
I would.
Yeah,
Possible.
yeah, I'll second that.
So that's a week from, 2 weeks from yesterday.
2 weeks from yesterday. Next week, Robin and I are scheduled to be out of the office.
I am too. I'm gone that next week.
Okay, well, I mean, just as long as we get the message out there that we want to talk about it, I think, too.
But it gives them sufficient time to reflect on it and talk to
Yeah.
their staff,
Okay.
with their financial folks. But that begs the question, if we wait until the 2 weeks from yesterday, is that sufficient time to implement change if we want to do that, if we need to do that?
Well, we could do the Jello change Robin talked about. We'll call it the Jello adjustment or something.
Yeah. But does that give you sufficient time if we were to opt to do that, to go to an annual? If the majority or wholeheartedly, all the elected said, no, we just want this annual, get rid of this biennial. Can we change that if we wanted to at that date? As a result of that, at the end of that discussion next, 2 weeks from yesterday, would that
So
be
I
able to do
could,
that?
we could certainly make the resolution work. I would not be able to make changes in the system. And the reports may or may not reflect a 2-year budget.
Okay, so
I'd have to look at that.
with what Commissioner Edwards says, the Jello challenge, if that was the intent of the electeds and the intent of the board was to move to that, we could build that into the resolution, so after next year, then 2022, we could set it up. In 2021, we could set it for 22.
Right. Right. We would, what we would do is expand this midterm to be, well, we would, if for the first change we would not adopt in October, so that there would be more time to consider structural changes.
Okay.
See, we can do that regardless of what we call it.
Okay. All right. Anything more on that topic before we move on to priorities?
Nope, good.
Ty?
No, thank you.
Okay. Priorities, Robin?
Okay, so this is coming a little late in the year too, but usually by this time I would have talked to the board about what it is that you each hope to see as you consider adopting a budget this fall. And so just as an example, I looked back over the last 5 years. Here are some of the things that individual commissioners brought forward. And as you can see by this list, some were funded and extremely successful. Some were funded to possibly less success, and some have not been funded. They were just, these are ideas or concepts or actions that you would like to propose that would show up in the fall when you're choosing what to devote the limited resources to. So like we put a little bit of money in, I think it was 2016, into promoting telework. I think they put $5,000 into that. It was just not enough. And as we see today, when we are desperate for telework capacity, we could have done so much more. Whereas for fish passages, we found a way to fund that through REIT. The culvert projects have been wildly successful, and we've been able to leverage external funds to really do wonderful things when it comes to the fish passages. So the question for you today is, oh, and by the way, as you see, these are wide-ranging topics. So the question for you today is, what is it you'd like to see when you do the budget review in October?
All right, Commissioner, oh, hey, Commissioner Menster, anything to begin with?
Sure, you just want me to tick through?
Well, yeah, in fact, I was gonna ask Robin or Romero, do you want to just, are you going to, I know Rob or Romero will take notes, but do you want to put them on the board as what our priorities are? Or you just want all of them? Or are we gonna finesse them down?
So if you just toss out your ideas now, then we could talk about, if you're ready to talk about it, you know, approximately how much. And then I would work with, in these last 4 days, I would work with offices or departments to make sure that something is in the budget somewhere that would reflect what it is you hope to talk about in the fall.
Okay, go ahead, Ty.
Okay, well, I try to be really short because I think that I assume resources are going to be very constrained. So one of my priorities is I've talked to the board about in the past is the Criminal Justice Program Manager. This was funded in 2016 and slashed out in 2017. And I've talked to the prosecutor and the sheriff and public defense about it, and everybody seems to think it's a good idea. So that's one idea. Related to criminal justice is just making sure that we have, I know we've already talked as a board about lead, but I want to make sure that we have, if there was question about where the match is coming from. So I want to make sure that we allocate for that, because obviously that's leveraging in a whole bunch of state money to do something really important. The second area for me is the climate mitigation plan. I would like to budget for full implementation of the recommendations that are going to come out here in another month or so. We don't know exactly what that cost is, but TCAT estimated it's 1.2 million for the entire region, all the jurisdictional actions. So it would be hopefully something south of that. But whatever that number is, I think that's a priority. And then the third thing on my list was, and again, I'm not 100% sure I support this, but I at least want to have the conversation with the board about whether we would want to increase our level of service for the animal services, JASCOM, because we seem to have continual problems. And the sheriff's office gets the burden of a lot of calls, and they don't have the capacity to respond. And we don't necessarily want them to respond because we've got an animal services crew that's trained. So I think we should talk about the going back to full funding so that we're level with the other jurisdictions and kind of solves a lot of problems. That's my short list, not knowing what resources we can have.
All right, Gary?
I guess I'd just follow up on Commissioner Mentzer's, the position you're talking about with criminal justice, some type of criminal justice reform. I think we could look at that whole package as how we're doing business. I know there's a lot of community concern on that. The animal services, I think that, I believe the sheriff has had communications with the city of Yelm, and they do their own animal services out there. I think he felt that for the amount of money we pay, we could get complete county coverage of more adequate animal services through some kind of a contract with the city of Yelm for less money and more service. So I do think that might be worth looking into, but we should somehow hear maybe from the sheriff on that, because that's kind of where it filters back to. I really think that we need to pay attention to legislative liaison, probably this time around more than other times even, because it might be ever more important to make sure that we're not saddled with unfunded mandates and such as we look for some relief from this whole COVID business. I see one of the activities here, for examples from the past, is EDC and Economic Development Coordinator, which we've got now, but I would like to see a lot more emphasis working in that area and with the professional organizations that work within those groups, Chamber of Commerce and such, and see what they would like to see happen in the area of regulatory reform. And the reason I bring that up, I think regulatory reform is going to become more and more important as time goes on, because you've heard me talk about the potential flight from the urban core to the suburbs or rural America. Well, I'm here to tell you that is really happening now. And I think it's ever more important that we have adequate planning for that, but also let's see if we can't reap a benefit from that. And even the new way of doing business, and I'll say it's the Amazon business plan versus the retail outlet up at the mall. I mean, I see we're going to become accustomed to much more delivery process to our homes rather than going shopping. So I don't know how that's going to fit in with traffic planning and carbon footprint, a lot of things like that that might come into play. So those are just a few rough ideas. I mean, that's very rough ideas. I see Robin's got her hand up there.
Go ahead, Robin, I'll give you mine.
So just a clarifying question for Commissioner Edwards. When you talk about regulatory reform, are you perhaps thinking that we would get there through hiring additional planners in CPED to work on the changes to the code?
I don't know if it would take additional or a change in philosophy. There's been, you know, absolute no growth philosophy has been kind of the mantra, if you will, over the last 15 years. I think that's obviously going to have to change. Now it's going to be, as we accommodate growth, let's do it without damaging the environment, thinking about other ways. The climate mitigation group was talked about. Well, maybe we do need to include in some of that planning an additional R factor. Maybe the placement of homes so the roof is facing to the south or something. I don't know. So they could have maybe incentives for solar panels to lessen the need for electrical connections. I think all that, it's all encompassing, that it's incumbent upon us to try and figure all this stuff out as we move along to do the best job we can for the taxpayers that we're representing. So we lessen the load on the taxpayers, give them a better service, if you will. At the same time, I mean, if you talk about, you know, criminal justice reform, I believe everybody's interested in talking about that to see, are there enhancements that we can make? If you think about what juvenile's done over the last 10 years, they've done a phenomenal job on eliminating the need for large correctional facilities. Now, is it working? I don't know. We better find out if it's preventing recidivism, if those folks just end up in the adult facility or not. But I get a sense that there's a lot of areas that we could look up into for efficiencies. So that's kind of a long-winded answer for you.
Right. And I understand the goal. I'm just trying to figure out a practical, you know, what can we put in the budget for the board to consider
I
that
do
would
think
get
it's
you
about,
to the goal?
I think it's about philosophy more than budgetary items. I mean,
Okay.
that's the same thing I see with homeless, for an example. And we might have an exasperated homeless situation here as the financial situation deteriorates. But I do think that we can't just let everyone who wants to just live a unencumbered lifestyle, and which I kind of often refer to as a deviant lifestyle. They want to do their dope, live their own thing. They don't want to abide by any society rules. I think we have to review that and make sure that people are held accountable as they slide into this downward spiral, if you will, and let's help them make better decisions. And those better decisions might take a little tough love, an alternative, incarceration or treatment or something like that. But we have to address, you know, mental health treatment, drug treatment. There's a lot of things that we have to do as a package, and a lot of them, it's going to take a philosophy change rather than a financial influx into it.
All right, you ready for my input, Robin?
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. Number one, to achieve what Commissioner Edwards and Commissioner Menser would like, it's going to take money. So and I listed these in priorities. I have 4 of them. Number one is economic development in the rural area of the county by virtue of either increased contributions to the VCB, Visitors Convention Bureau, or the Economic Development Council to promote Thurston County. Because we won't be able to afford to do anything we'd like to do without increased revenues, and that's going to come from reasonable, responsible development in the county in balance with nature. So that also begs the question that Commissioner Edwards brought up, some type of regulation relaxing or incentives to bring business, commerce, research and development, not smoking stacks type industry to Thurston County, but something reasonable and prudent that will bring in white collar type jobs and with livable wages. So economic development is important for me. Number 2 would be addressing the Thurston County Sheriff's Office staffing via perhaps a public safety tax with appropriate guardrails that the board puts on to ensure that that money is going to hire deputies and go to the county sheriff's office and not be spread out so thin where it becomes somewhat meaningless to what the goal is. And I believe that with the increased fashionable fervor that's going on, that will put an increase on the county sheriff's services being the top dog in the county when it comes to law enforcement. The sheriff will need some assistance. But you can't do that without money. You can't do that without economic development. Number 3 would be continue on with the fish passages. I know that is a lot of that's grant money and it's leveraged. But I think fish passages are really important and vital to all of our partners as well in the entire area. And number 4 is parks attention. We've got beautiful parks, but we can't maintain them. Having 4 parks assisted or staff, if that's what it is pretty sad. But you can't do that without additional revenue. Our parks and habitat it's a draw to Thurston County from outside other urban areas. It's great for recreation, for kids, for families, photographers, for mental health. Our parks are just really cool, especially the Deschutes Falls. So I'd love to have the future boards pay attention to our parks, but we can't do that again without number 1, and that's economic development in our county rural area to bring in increased revenues. So that, in my opinion, that's got to be the number 1 draw, or number 1 priority is whatever it takes to increase commerce to Thurston County. That's what we need to establish first to get our revenue balanced out. That's it. Commissioner Menser.
Just to chime in on yours, Hutch, I agree on fish passage, and then on parks. Parks was also kind of on my list, but it's just I'm not worried about revenue, and I guess what I want to see with parks is I'd like to see us move that legislation that we had a head start on, and then we kind of pulled it back, but allowing flexibility with our impact fees to use them for maintenance and operation. I think with that legislative change, and I know Representative Dolio had thought that there was a shot at that. With that change, we would, I think, be able to develop more of our parks and finance their appropriate maintenance. So I didn't put that in as a budget priority because I'm hoping that we could work with our Deborah Munguia and work with our legislators to move that legislation and give us some flexibility on that front.
Gary, anything? Follow up to this?
So just
Anything?
No, well,
No, I was asking Gary, do you have anything to add to?
no, I think both of you have good ideas there. I'm curious about, not concerned about revenue from, I don't know if Commissioner Menser didn't finish his sentence there, or?
I was just saying, I didn't put parks on my priority list because it was kind of like the next thing that I didn't lay out more money for parks because I just wasn't confident we're going to have the money to put more county general fund money toward parks, given my other priorities. So I just wanted to say that I do support the concept of improving our parks and increasing resources to them. I just want to find if there's another way to get there, given my commitment to the criminal justice issues and the climate mitigation issues, parks to me falls off the list a little bit because I'm just not sure what's going to be available. But I do support looking long-term at how to improve our long-term maintenance of our park system.
Hutch, could I comment on one other thing, sir? I believe the chair makes some good points, and he's right. There's nothing that we're going to be able to do if we can't enhance revenue for this county, and that's going to boil down basically the way the legislation is set up to address counties, and that goes back to that 15-85% split. We need to promote retail outlet in the unincorporated area of the county. Now, whether that's in the urban growth area of the county or easing up on retail outlet in the rural areas of the county, I'm open to that discussion, but we need to do something. And I'm going to use Pierce County as an example. If you look at Tacoma, they have their municipality, and then it goes to Parkland and Spanaway and on out the Mountain Highway. And yes, it's like a municipal area, I guess, if you will, but it certainly gives the Pierce County folks in county government the revenue stream they need to provide services. We have none of that in the unincorporated area, and so I think we really need to look into that. Maybe we could address some of it through legislation and working with Deborah, but we need to have adequate revenue to provide any of the services that we're talking about.
Romero?
No, I'm just trying to summarize what I hear from the board members.
Did you have more, Ty? Go ahead.
Just one point. I mean, I'm glad that Commissioner Edwards hit on that because to me, those laws about that govern county financing can change, and we made it as a #1 legislative priority last year. I want to continue to push that. Commissioner Edwards is always talking about phase 2 of GMA, and he's right. And I want to see that. I want to see phase 2 of GMA, or whatever you want to call it. I want to see a change in the structure of county financing. I don't want the only answer to be we've got to basically subvert the principles of the GMA that work well for the county in a number of regards. There are other ways to approach that financing problem other than just tossing out growth management principles.
Thank you. Go ahead, Romero.
Robin.
Robin.
I just wanted to say thank you, and sorry to cut in front of Romero. But think of this as an opportunity to get things into consideration. And I would, this might not be a great analogy, but when my children were young, at Christmas and birthdays, I would ask them for their wish lists. And they knew that they would never get everything that's on their wish list, but they also knew if they didn't tell me what they wanted, they would never get it. So this is your opportunity to talk about your wants. We don't want to create expectations that you're actually going to get it, but it does put things in the hopper for consideration, because that's what every office and department is doing right now. They're putting in their proposals for what's going to get funded next year, and this is your chance to do that.
Okay. Is it your turn yet, Romero?
I'm just trying to summarize what I
Summarize. Thank you. I want to allow time for the citizen engagement.
So in following up with Robin, I clarified the intent of this conversation. is really to bring some ideas, some projects, programs that you would like to incorporate in the upcoming biennial budget that has a dollar amount and a financial impact. And I know the board members discuss philosophy and discuss, as to how they like to see the county in terms of legislative regulatory reform. But those may not be necessarily included about financial impact and for you to consider while you deliberate the 2021-2022 budget. So what I got in terms of tangible dollar amounts, or perhaps something that you may consider, is the criminal justice program manager. We have probably a position that we need to bring the cost of that for your consideration. What I have is the lead match for the lead program. I think we have about $300,000. Perhaps we have an avenue to use the TST, so that is a tangible, something that we can bring up. In terms of the climate mitigation plan, the funding implementation, whether we can take the 1.5 million as a starting point and have what would be the share, quote unquote, of the county, that will be a tangible number that we can bring this up. And also increase the level of service for animal service. So it seems to me that although the Commissioner Mincer and Commissioner Edwards talk about the same issue, but it's totally polarized in terms of the approach to this. Commissioner Mincer is considering increasing the level of service, which increase the contributions from the county to animal service. Commissioner Edwards spoke about the same issue by trying to get away from animal service contract and maybe look at the options to get a contract with the city of Yelm, I believe. So it seems to be the same label, but totally different approaches to this, in a way polarized on the two of them.
But we can put a placeholder in the budget so it's addressed this fall.
Okay, so I'm just going to make sure that clarified, what I'm hearing. Also, Commissioner Edwards, I believe, was supportive also of the criminal justice program manager. So we'll put that as a tangible. The legislative liaison regulatory reform, there's something more of a direction policy. And we will continue to, I will continue to work with Deborah, and we'll add some of the board's priorities. They will be your legislative priorities when the legislative session begins next year. And we'll work on make sure that I capture those so I don't, for your consideration. Commissioner Hutchins, that he would like to increase the contribution that we have to the VCV as well as the ADC.
Say that again, sir.
That Commissioner Hutchins would like to increase the contribution
To?
the Visitors Conversion Bureau as well as the Economic Development Council. We already contribute that. I will ask by how much so we can put it in the budget.
Yes, it wasn't so much contribute more, although that would be ideal, because we don't have the revenue, I don't think, for that. But to focus on that as a priority, wherever we can, support them in their efforts and their policies in their direction as well. There's other ways other than just money, but that's a bottom line to help them achieve their goals as well. Robin?
So again, I can put a placeholder in the budget, like a $5,000 placeholder. And when it comes time to review, you could change that number or take it out. But putting a placeholder in with a nominal amount will get it on the table.
Well, that's where I would sit, but I'll leave it I defer to my seatmates.
I have no heartburn with that at all.
So, and again, you're not voting on this. This is just a wish list.
Philosophical direction, right.
Get it on the table.
Yeah, and you will have that deliberation when it comes to the budget deliberations. Then you will have the opportunity to actually vote whether you want to support financially or not.
Okay.
So the next item that I have is related to the Thurston County Sheriff and the public safety tax. I guess what I've heard about this item is to add on the budget cost to bring this to a ballot measure. in 2021, and that is where we have a financial impact. Is that what I've heard?
Whatever it's going to take to address the under budget and understaffing that the sheriff has. It could be a public safety tax. I'm not sure where else it could come from that wouldn't be painful everywhere else or anywhere else. But that would be the, I think that's the easiest goal to guarantee, not guarantee, well, pretty much guarantee up to $4 million a year, 1/10 of 1%. And I'm just speaking about 30,000 feet high to the sheriff's office, dedicated to the sheriff's office.
I understand that. So,
Could I comment on
What
that,
it would
sir?
cost to get to the
so I
ballot.
guess what I'm suggesting is
Saying
to
it.
add a line item on the proposed to how much it will cost for a ballot measure to go on to the votes next year.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
I guess, having watched that evolve over the years, I really think that you're going to need to coordinate that with the sheriff, with adequate sideboards on that funding stream to make sure that it isn't plagiarized for other things. That's the key if we were ever to move forward on that.
I don't disagree with that, and that conversation needs to occur before the board puts any measure before the voters. I'm just trying to capture the idea on the upcoming biennial that if in fact the board is planning to have a conversation with the sheriff, we have enough money to put a measure on the ballot. The cost of that measure on the ballot. You're not committing to anything at this point.
Tell me this, I guess I need to know in that regard, there is a difference in cost. If we try to put it on a ballot and it's the sole issue on a ballot, and I think the cost is way higher than if we just stick it on the ballot with other issues. So
Maybe
I
we
don't
can
know what
just-
the answer is.
Let's
I
put a
agree with that.
placeholder.
That's nitty gritty. That's the detail.
Let's just put a placeholder at
Yeah.
this point, and that conversation occurs when you
Oh,
discuss the
okay,
budget.
is that kind of going back to that same thing about just stick it in there, $5,000 and,
Yeah, it's just a placeholder.
Okay.
You would have that
Put in the
conversation.
placeholder.
I'm fine.
And I agree, it's got to have side rails that the sheriff's amenable to, and if it's kind of wishy-washy, well, I'm not really sure, then I wouldn't waste 5 more words on it, move on. Because if it doesn't have his support, it's not going to pass. But a placeholder would be nice, thank you.
But could I comment on one other thing here with that the county manager mentioned that Commissioner Menser and I are kind of headed in the same direction, and that is on that animal control. If we put something on there, that's fine, I guess, as a placeholder, but I think it's going to be saving us revenue if we were to enter into a contract, and we need to find out more from the sheriff and what conversations he's had with the mayor out at Yelm, I think, about this, because I don't know if we need a placeholder. That's just when we're going to add money, right? I'm looking at saving money, because I think we ought to always strive to get the best bang for our buck for the taxpayers in everything we do. So if it's
That'd be
saving
a
money, do
future
we still need a placeholder?
No, but that's Commissioner Menser's proposal to increase the level of service.
Right.
So that'd be a discussion down the
And that will
road.
be this-
We need a
that will be-
placeholder.
will be-
I want to increase it through efficiencies.
Well, that will be part of your conversation when you deal with this in the budget.
So we've got about, 25 minutes, let's go ahead and, if we can move on,
I just have 2 more,
go
just to
ahead,
make
yeah.
sure that I capture
please.
your thoughts. You also had the fish passage, continuing the fish passage. So I assume, do you want to increase, because right now is funded out of the RE2, $2 million a year.
I'm happy with what we're doing, since it received state, national, and international awards. I think what we're doing is just great.
As am I. I mean, I'd like to do more, but I don't know we're going to have that leeway to do more. We're going into, we don't know if it's a storm yet or if the sky's falling. I haven't figured all that out. And I'll be real honest with you. The biggest factor that stuck me was spending $1 million on a sandbox. That's where I'm at on that.
So I put it
Is
as a
that-
priority,
that
not just to make sure it's not
sandbox, but-
it's a
the
sandbox
fish aren't defunded. I don't want to defund the fish.
So I just wanted, again, I just want to understand.
Thank you.
So the first passage, so what I'm hearing, Commissioner Hutchins, you do not want to increase the $2 million, because the $2 million will come as part of the new.
Yes, I just want to keep it as a priority, keep it
Okay, so
going,
that will be part of the conversation.
keep it spawning, yeah.
And lastly, I was a little bit off on the parks funding. Commissioner Mensah said he's considering, but increasing the funding for parks, but through a legislative action, which certainly can include that as part of the legislative agenda. But at this point, is the board interested in finding a line item on go ahead, Robin.
So they wouldn't vote now, but we
No,
can
no.
put a placeholder in for increased staffing, so they can consider that and
So
how to
that's-
do it in October.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to clarify what that conversation was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mencher had his hand up there.
No, my
Thumbs
thumb
up.
was up. I was just trying to
Thumbs up.
explain why parks wasn't on my own personal list, but I fully support a line item where we, if there's money there that we didn't anticipate, then parks is a good place to talk about putting.
Okay,
And I don't know where it fits, but it kind of fits in with parks and recreation and all that type of thing. But I know before too long, we're going to be asked to do something about Black Lake, that group out there. And boy, I think it's actually a crime that we have all these other users than the Black Lake taxpayers, and we don't get any benefit from that. So I don't know if that's legislation that we should get a little bit of that boating fee or what, but I think something has to tie in, because there's a big difference in opinion out there at Black Lake between the senior parks, if you will, if they should be carrying the burden, or what about users and those type of things. So I don't know where we're going on that vote or anything, but I think it's worth discussing. I don't know, charging a fee at the state boat launch, or charging them $1 million and let them charge the fee.
A later discussion, yeah.
so the briefing is coming up in a couple of weeks for you to decide whether you'd like to support the request of the Black Lake Special Use District or not, and that will be your decision at that point.
The next is engagement in the budget process, and the next page right after that title page, the statement at the top says, citizen engagement is a best practice in budgeting. And I don't know if that's fact or fiction or an opinion. I'm not saying I disagree with it, but it's just a blanket statement that it's the best practice. So let's get on from there. I see there's benefits and challenges. And I turn it over to Robin.
Okay, moving into the last part of today's work session, citizen engagement. Just brief lists here, the benefits, and again, this is in the literature around budgeting on a national and an international basis. Having citizens engaged in the process improves government decision-making. This is what all the literature says. It's not just my opinion. Creates opportunities for citizens to shape policies because you're letting them in and listening to them. It informs and educates the public about what government does and how it's funded. It lends legitimacy to decisions that government makes. It involves citizens in monitoring outcomes because as they learn more about government and the budget, they see how funding is connected to what actually occurs and is a way to enhance the citizen trust. There are challenges to citizen engagement. There is a general lack of knowledge about what specific levels of government do. As you know, we get a lot of comments. For example, for a while, we were getting comments about funding schools. Counties don't pay for schools. So there's an opportunity for education when you do it, but it's a challenge at first getting people well enough informed to really engage. Perception isn't, there is a perception among citizens that their input is not valued. So that's a challenge that you have to address. There's a general lack of trust of government, citizen apathy. Look at the number of people that show up at your board meetings, for example. There's not a large group that engages on a regular basis. There are time constraints, and it's hard to get balanced participation. And what that means is in order to get people that represent all points of view at the table, it's hard to bring everyone forward. So this is just a overview of the benefits and challenges.
Are we going to talk about that just a little bit?
Of course we are.
I mean, okay, I got my hand up.
No, I know, I got mine up too. Ty, you have your hand up? Okay.
Not yet.
I just want to go back to the very first question. It says citizen engagement is a best practice in budgeting. That is an absolute statement. I want to know whether it could be the best practice, or perhaps it could be, or is considered to be. Is that an absolute? Citizen engagement is the best practice in budgeting.
It is, I could have phrased that better, apparently. It is considered a best practice in budgeting by the GFOA, the ICMA, there are a large body of professionals in budgeting who will tell you that it's good to engage citizens. It is considered a best practice.
Good, thank you for that. That sets the groundwork. And you've listed the benefits and challenges satisfactorily. I'll expound on one once I let my seatmates have their way. Commissioner Edwards, go ahead. We got about till 11.
Yeah, I'll try to make it go quick here. On that topic, I believe that citizen involvement is a best practice. Encouraging citizen involvement is another thing. And I really think if we, and the lack of trust, I mean, that lack of trust is one of the biggest issues out there, I think. And we ask citizens to come in and comment, and then we give them 3 minutes. I think we ought to be giving citizens a block of time so that they know they can present their views so that we can consider the information that they're supplying to us. Right now, we get communication, but we get very little explanation of that communication. We put everybody down the same, 3 minutes. The nut that's got nothing to offer gets 3 minutes, and we end up in a situation with professionals that deal in money coming forward, and they get 3 minutes. So I think we ought to have a block of time to allow maybe an hour for individuals to come forward. We may get 2 or 3 people, we might get 10 people. I don't know, in the past, all the budget presentations I've sat through, there's been very few people that have stepped forward. Those that did always had more information to give us, yet we cut them off at the knees before they're able to give that information. So I think that is a big piece of what we're doing here, and we ought to encourage that citizen participation. I can't help but think that citizens that watch us on YouTube or TV or whatever think, geez, that's, what, you're gonna cover that $1 million topic or $100 million topic in 3 minutes, and that's all they get? So that's kind of where I'm at on that.
All right, Commissioner Menser?
I just want, no, I have nothing at this point.
Okay. I would agree, citizen engagement I think is vital. You listed all the benefits, and you've listed, demonstrated you understand the challenges, very challenging, going back to what Commissioner Edwards just said about regarding lack of trust, but also that would increase trust. But the challenge of getting involvement, getting people involved, the right kind of people, vetting the people to get on onto some type of an engagement panel, because you listed the last challenge, not in order of importance, but as hard to get balanced participation. And in today's fervor regarding citizen involvement in government, it's become very extreme, and By that, I mean it appears to be agenda-driven participation rather than a balanced approach. As you said, hard to get balanced participation. Many people they'd rather criticize, delegitimize, discredit, or grandstand on an issue or agenda rather than actively participate with good, solid information or of offers or suggestions. And there are those, of course, as you well know, that they don't understand or appreciate authority except for its insolence, which is being rude and impertinent. So that would be a real challenge, but I really invite the public to get involved if it's done in an orderly and a fashionable way, not just picking people that I want or a future board wants, but to represent a wide range of folks so it doesn't get out of balance. And so that would be one of the biggest challenges, but I definitely encourage citizen involvement.
So everything that you've all contributed is exactly why you want to be very thoughtful about how you set up an engagement process as part of budget deliberation. And what this table talks a little bit about is that the first thing that the board would want to do is set the goal. What is it that you want to get out of engagement if you were to go through something of a formal process? Do you seek to inform, consult, involve, collaborate, or empower citizens? And then depending on what your goal is, you would make a promise to the public. For example, if your goal is to consult with citizens before you make decisions, the promise is that you would keep them informed, listen, acknowledge concerns, and provide feedback regarding those concerns. So that would be the promise. And then the example of how to do it would be through public comment forums, focus groups, and surveys, if the goal was to have the consultation of the citizens. So each level of this is like a continuum, and you could certainly mix them, but you'd want to set the goal, and then we would proceed accordingly. And as you move from the left to the right, these become more intensive engagements, more time consuming, and more costly to do. So here are some examples of what we've done in the past. We have a little interactive tool, and in 2017, we said to citizens, if you had $500 and these were the county activities, and we provided a broad range of county activities, what you see on this page are roll-ups, how would you spend $500? We had 177 people submitted. Here's how I would spend my $500. You see in a priority order the broad categories: economic vitality, law and justice. It gives us a sense of the people who participated, what their priorities are as the board went into making decisions about how to allocate money. We could easily stand that up again. It's not statistically valid. It's just dependent on whoever decides to play, but it is a way to get feedback. This is not something that the county currently has. There is budget simulator software out there where we would actually load our budget into the system, and anyone could go in and say, I have $300 million. Here's how I would allocate it amongst all of the activities of Thurston County. A citizen would essentially build their own county budget. When we were talking to the people that do this particular software last year, Balancing Act is what the software is called. They were telling me that the cost would be under $10,000. They would come in and set it up. We would have to maintain it. We did some work sessions with them, and we chose to not move forward because at the time we were in the process of considering or moving forward with an ERP, and it was just not the time to bring new finance software into play. But this could go up fairly quickly. Pierce County just did this to get input about COVID. So this is an option that we could stand up. In 2017, we did a survey. We have the results of that survey. This is just one chart of many that came out of that. It was statistically valid. It was also quite expensive. And it would be difficult to stand one up at this time for many reasons. And I'm sorry, I'm moving through these pretty quickly due to time constraints. The other option is a citizen advisory committee. In 2008, there was a citizen task force on budget. They held weekly meetings from February to April of 2008. We have their report. They did not make specific budget item recommendations, but there were a lot of recommendations about budget processes. So I'd be happy to share that report with you. We had a conversation a few years ago with the board about having a citizen review process using existing committees. That's something possible. We could share the budget with advisory committees and have short workshops with them and get their input, or we could have a moderated town hall process for an invited group to review the preliminary budget. These are all things we could do. These are kind of in order of the very easiest to stand up our website to something that would be difficult to do in a short amount of time to get meaningful information. But if you're interested in any of these, we could stand something up this year.
Okay. Commissioner Menser?
I was thinking on that continuum of something in the collaborative sort of vein, and the thing that, and I was thinking of a more kind of durable citizen advisory committee, and I understand that that's not going to get stood up this year. I'm thinking more long term. As something that we put together for the next time around, but we let the public know that we're putting it together thoughtfully, carefully, and it's going to be something kind of lasting and enduring that will be part of our processes in the future. So that's what I think. I think a lot of these online software tools and stuff, and I've been to the thing where you put the dots on the board and stuff. I just don't think that I don't think they have weight with the board. I just feel like the board doesn't, at least previous boards that I've observed, haven't put much weight into what those results of those were. They just kind of brush them off. It's just kind of a window dressing exercise. I want something that has more weight to where there's more citizen input, and with a group of citizens that, I mean, the budget's super complex. So you have to have a group of citizens that are willing to learn about it. If they're going to make any useful, meaningful recommendations, they got to learn quite a bit about the budget. And so that's going to take something more durable. Everything short of that, in my opinion, is, I'm being harsh, but a waste of time to some degree.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, well, I'm not too far off there from what Commissioner Menser is talking about. The business of giving them a $300 million budget, and then they're going to spend it this way or that way, or $500. They're going to spend it this way or that way. I don't think makes any sense. I do think giving citizens more time to explain their concerns to us would go a long ways in developing community trust. And I know there's a financial community out there that I believe they would come in and participate a little bit if they knew that we were going to give them time to do so. When you give somebody 3 minutes to talk about a $300 million budget, and then basically disregard it, say, I think that's a slap in the face myself. So I think we should have a block of time
set aside for citizen input. We don't have to put an exact time on it. I don't know, it might be 20 minutes if only 2 people show up. I don't know. I'm not making a concrete decision at this point in time, but I think we need to pay attention to those that bring issues to our attention, and we ought to look into them.
So I like the idea of an advisory committee as well. And I like how you laid out on page 20, possible citizen review process using existing committees like Thurston Thrive committees, various advisory committees. That sounds reasonable to me, and it would take, they've been vetted already, and anything that the commissioners or the board want to do regarding the citizen engagement, the biggest piece is going to be education. I really like when I was on the TST advisory committee, the treatment sales tax committee, Robin, you're coming in and saying, here's your monopoly money, you have X amount of dollars, how would you send it, or how would you spend it? And it's allocated on the board, how would you spend it? That was a big eye-opener, and was very, it was a very useful exercise. I wouldn't open that up to the community, because someone's going to say, well, I just put it all over here, because it's lack of education and understanding of the process and the mandates of government. But I like that among a reasonable group of people that already have that education or receive the training in budgeting, so they have the understanding with which to work. So I really like that idea. And the virtual town hall meeting, that's not a bad idea either. But that's something for, not for this session, but something for down the road for a future board. Ty?
Just throw out that it could be another argument for a single year budget, that we could do that and then really put this committee together and then really have them be part of building the 2022 budget next year.
Thank you.
You know, we're getting ready to wind down here. I would really like to see at some point when we get into economic development, if you will, which is all about revenue, which is all about money to provide services, I think we ought to be thinking about an ombudsman position to intercede, kind of like what we have our economic development person doing to a degree, but have somebody out here troubleshooting what the problem is when it comes to permitting and all the roadblocks that are thrown up. I'll just throw out one real quick example. In June, a check was cashed for a sizable amount of money for a boundary line adjustment. And then when the citizen was doing follow-up asking, well, what's going on with that? And this was just a couple of weeks ago. And, well, we don't have your application. We can't find anything about what you're talking about. But yet, we had cashed the check in June. And there's still no record. So we need somebody that can get in here and figure out how to fix things. I've heard several excuses of why that didn't happen. Well, we didn't use the parcel number, and we should have. Maybe the address didn't line up with the parcel number. But I can't hardly believe you go to the assessor's office, give them a parcel number, bam, they got it right there, whatever your property situation is. So I think there's things that we can do to help expedite this process of getting our economy going.
Thank you. Final thoughts, Robin, and I'll have Romero wrap it up.
Yep, that's it for me.
Okay.
So thank you, commissioners. So related to back to the annual versus biennial budget, Robin will ask the question to the fiscal managers, representative offices, and departments. Also, I will have an item on the upcoming elected officials meeting for you to talk with your fellow elected officials on August 19th. On the commissioner's priorities, I already summarized that. You will see some elements to that. And I believe the board is leaning towards actually standing an advisory committee next year that will help the board set priorities on the budget for the upcoming budget cycles.
Good, thank you. So Robin, thank you. Denise, thank you. Patty, thank you. C. Mace, thank you. And Commissioner, I did it again. County Manager, Ramiro Chavez, thank you very much. That ends this session on budgeting, and we're going to move into an executive session pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, subsection 1, subsection E, to consider in the case of an export trading company, financial and commercial information supplied by private persons to the export trading company, business development. Commissioner actions may follow, and we expect this to last 1 hour, and it's 11:01 hours.
30 minutes, Commissioner.
30 minutes, and it's 11:01. Thank you very much.
So I will close this Zoom meeting because we have another Zoom meeting scheduled for the executive session. So please.
If there's anybody online, please hang up. What?